Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Live now to College Green at Westminster, where David Jones is waiting. Thank you for your patience. He was a Brexit minister. He is the Conservative MP for Clwyd West. Are you warm in our LBC tent?
It's very snug, yes, thank you.
Good, good. I'm glad we're looking after you. Who will you go as at Halloween? Theresa May or Donald Tusk?
The question is whether we ever get to Halloween, politically
Oh, we'll
speaking.
get to Halloween.
Well, yes, but politically speaking, what will happen before then? And I think quite a few things are likely to happen. I think one thing that is more or less certain to happen is that the Prime Minister will have to step aside and be replaced by another leader, and that, of course, will do a lot to change the game.
Well, if I may, not that the post of Prime Minister isn't important, but I think for most people listening, interested though they are in that, the future of Brexit is probably more important.
Yes.
You're not saying which party, by the way, you might vote for in the European elections.
Actually, I did.
Okay.
I've made it clear to you. You're referring to the BBC Wales report.
Yes.
Yeah, I went on BBC Wales this morning, made the point I've never voted for any party other than the Conservatives, nor would I ever do so.
Right. But will you definitely vote at the European elections if they happen?
Yeah, yes, but on that point, I think it's extremely important to point out that this is an exercise that's going to cost £108 million, and it's very likely...
I mean, Chris Grayling could get dozens of ferries for that.
It's also very likely that those who take up their seats, if in fact we have that election, will probably be sitting there for a maximum of 4 months. And I think it's quite unreasonable to expect candidates to slog the streets for several weeks in order to be elected to a parliament in which they will probably not be participating.
People will make that choice, won't they? Why do you think Brexit hasn't happened? I mean, there'll be many reasons for it, but principally, who's responsible for that, do you think?
I think, frankly, it's a lack of will on the part of the British government. The legal structure is in place. The Commons passed all the necessary legislation, including the Withdrawal Act, which prescribed, you'll recall, the 29th of March as the date. And then it became very clear that the government was getting cold feet about leaving without a negotiated agreement, even though that was what was provided for in the Act, and is now doing its level best to ensure that if we do leave, it's going to be on the softest terms possible.
So you think it's a lack of will on the part of the British government. Do you think that leavers who may, during the referendum campaign, have overpromised and ultimately underdelivered, do you think they bear any responsibility for Brexit not yet happening?
No, I don't think so, because once the referendum process was complete, it then became an issue for the government to deliver. The government, of course, has been hampered by the fact that we had a very ill-advised general election in 2017, which, of course, wiped out the overall majority.
Well, before we come to the election, let's look at what was promised during the referendum. Liam Fox, coming to a free trade agreement with the EU should be one of the easiest in human history. John Redwood, getting out of the EU can be quick and easy. Boris Johnson, there are plenty of people who now think the cost of getting out would be virtually nil. That was all nonsense, wasn't it? Do any of those people and others who said similar things bear any responsibility for Brexit not yet happening?
Well, look, you're obviously asking me to defend things that other people have said, but what I would say is that
I'm asking you whether those people and others bear responsibility for Brexit not happening.
No, I don't think at all. Because, as I say, once the referendum was out of the way, once the legislation was in place, it was up to the government to deliver Brexit, and there was no reason why they shouldn't. And in fact, you'll probably recall that the Prime Minister made a speech in January of 2017 at Lancaster House, which was probably the best speech that she's made on the issue of Brexit, in which she spelled out a vision of a free trade agreement, of a good relationship with the European Union that wouldn't impede our trade and good relations with the rest of the world. And to get back to that election, after the election of 2017, that stopped. And I think that was where the lack of will crept in.
Well, I want to press you further, if I may, on this question of responsibility, because in my experience, when you ask arch leavers in the Conservative Party why Brexit hasn't happened and what's gone wrong, it always seems to be someone else. It's never the Brexit-supporting Brexit ministers who were in charge. Apparently they were all hoodwinked by a cabal of Remain-supporting civil servants. It's not the Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab who confessed in November he hadn't quite understood how reliant UK trade in goods is on Dover-Calais. It's always those pesky Europeans. Leavers told us EU countries would fall out during negotiations and succumb to leave demands or even recently give in at the 11th hour. They haven't, have they? And I just wonder whether the promises of it's all going to be easy are part of why this hasn't worked.
Eddie, you recall that I haven't blamed the Europeans at all during this conversation. What I have blamed is, frankly, a lack of will on the part of the British government.
But never the leavers.
Well, the government comprises leavers and remainers. You can't actually factionalize a government. The government should have been proceeding with a very active process of preparation for leaving the European Union. They should have been publicizing the fact that they were doing that. They should not have agreed to the sequencing of the talks that the EU insisted upon. In other words, they didn't stand up to the EU. And I'll be frank with you, it has not been well handled. I'm not complaining at all about the European Union.
But would you complain about some of those levers I've quoted?
I'm not personalising people. But Liam Fox is in government, but John Redwood is not in government. He is not responsible for the conduct of the negotiations.
He's responsible for what comes out of his mouth, though.
Well, yes, but he has an opinion, as we all do.
Leave.eu broke electoral law and was fined £70,000. Leave.eu and an insurance company owned by Aaron Banks has been fined £120,000 over data law breaches. Do you think the referendum was crooked?
No, I don't. I was involved in the referendum campaign really from the beginning of 2016. I saw no evidence that it was crooked. By the way...
What about the evidence that the Electoral Commission's found?
Well, just a moment. Leave.eu was not, you'll recall, the designated campaign. Aaron Banks was not part of the designated campaign. I mean, it was a complex campaign, and the Electoral Commission has come to certain conclusions.
Do you agree with them?
I will accept the conclusions of the Electoral Commission, but what I can say is that I saw no evidence at all of any wrongdoing, and I was very closely involved with the campaign for many months.
So we have all of the promises made by some of those levers I quoted. We have Leave.eu breaking electoral law.
Who were not the designated campaigner, right?
Well, that difference may be lost on people who are reading the messages on Facebook, don't you think?
But they're not lost on you, Eddie, and you know the difference.
And what's the difference to people reading the messages?
Well, the designated campaign was Vote Leave, as you know, and Vote Leave, it was nothing to do with Aaron Banks. He had no participation in their activities at all.
So we have the promises made which have not been delivered, the promises made by Leave supporters. We have what happened during the campaign. And now all we hear from some hard Brexit Conservative MPs are that it's really time to get rid of Theresa May. Never mind the millions of people and businesses whose lives are on hold. Let's change the leader. Do you think millions of people in this country, those people who sincerely want out of the EU, do you think they deserve to be led by something better than a bunch of cheating chancers out for their own political and financial ends?
Again, that's your characterization, which I don't accept at all. And in fact, if you'd like to say which is the cheating chancellor that you're referring to, maybe I could comment.
Didn't we just talk about what happened to Leave.eu?
Well, we did, and I reminded you that Leave.eu were not the designated campaign, nor Leave.eu anything to do with government. I have made it clear that I think that the difficulty was a lack of will on the part of government, a lack of preparation, poor agreement of the sequencing of the talks that were demanded by the European Union. And I'm not blaming the EU at all, but what I am saying is that we could have been better led.
Could we have been better led by the Leave side before, during and after the referendum is really my question, because the obsession with getting rid of Theresa May continues. And Brexit still hasn't been delivered. Is it not time to for those people to change the subject?
Forgive me, I'm not obsessed with it at all, if that's what you are actually suggesting. What I'm saying to you is that I think that Theresa May, who has, I think, attempted to deliver what she thinks is in the national interest, is not really going to be able to take this process very much further because she's stymied. And I think that now is the time for the reset button to be pressed and for a new leader to commence the negotiations.
In what way is she stymied, would you say?
Because quite clearly she will not be able to get the withdrawal agreement through Parliament.
Who would?
Well, the issue is that Theresa May's withdrawal agreement is not going to fly. I'm not suggesting for a moment that withdrawal agreement will get through the House of Commons at all, because clearly it won't. It's been defeated 3 times, once by the biggest majority in British parliamentary history. And I think that it's time for a new negotiation with the European Union that is going to result in something that is far more likely to fly than the withdrawal agreement, which I don't think will.
Who would do a better job?
Well, that's a matter for consideration, and, I and colleagues will no doubt be considering that. Theresa May's made it clear that she wants to step down soon. She says she'll step down when the withdrawal agreement has gone through.
Well, maybe you should have some idea of who should take over. I just wonder who your favourites might be.
I've got some private views, but I think it's frankly premature for me to share those now.
You're urging the country to press the reset button on the Prime Minister, but won't tell us who you think should take over.
Well, in due course I will, but the fact is that at this particular stage I'm not prepared to share it.
Well, this comes down to my suggestion that there are some people, and I'm not accusing you of this, but there are some people I'm suggesting to you who are using this national crisis for their own political ends.
No, I firmly reject that. I think that is completely wrong. I'm glad that you said that I'm not doing that, because I certainly am not. I actually would support the withdrawal agreement if the Irish backstop could be removed. The Irish backstop is what destroys British sovereignty. It's what potentially removes Northern Ireland from the Union, and I'm not prepared to sell Northern Ireland down the river.
You wonder why during the referendum campaign Boris Johnson dismissed questions about the Irish border.
Well, you're asking me questions about other people, and really those questions would be far better directed at the people you're querying.
Thanks very much for taking the time. It's
You're
good to
very
see you.
welcome.
And thank you for sitting in our warm tent. And if you're a politician thinking about which programme to appear on, bear in mind how warm and cosy the global LBC tent is on College Green. That was David Jones, who was a Brexit minister. He is the Conservative MP for Clwyd West.